Since you want to live off of someone, why didn't you come to me? Jaden Garner stared at the red marks on my collarbone, his eyes glinting coldly and dangerously. You have a girlfriend, I said. I turned my face and refused to look at him. Jealousy welled up from the bottom of my heart. Jaden was stunned for a moment. He did not speak for a while. Then he suddenly grabbed my wrist. He laughed in the next second as he uttered my name, Natalie Yates. When he called my name with a smile, his voice was low and magnetic. I had to admit that he had a very nice voice. However, it sounded very harsh to me. What was he laughing at? I tossed him a wary glance and quickly lifted the strap of my dress to cover the red marks. Could it be that he was laughing at me because I spent years in the entertainment industry pretending to be reserved and innocent? Yet I was now running out of the director's room in a disheveled state. Was that why he asked me to live off of him? Before I could react, Jaden held my waist with his broad palms, and then suddenly pulled me toward him. It was as if he wanted to embed me in his arms. Natalie, he whispered to me again and let out a sound that resembled a sigh as he moved his fingertips slowly up my face. I stiffened, feeling hot and uncomfortable. It was too close. I was too close to him. All of a sudden, I caught a whiff of a familiar fragrance of pine and cypress on him. There was also an extremely faint trace of jasmine perfume in the mix. One would not notice it if one did not pay close attention. The perfume belonged to a lady. My pupils suddenly contracted. I knew I should stay away from him, but I felt ashamed and devastated when I realized that I was reluctant to leave him. I could not help scolding myself in my heart. He had a girlfriend, but I liked him. I was too despicable. He suddenly grabbed the back of my neck with his right hand and forced me closer to him. Girlfriend? Do you have terrible eyesight? Huh? He looked down at me as his hot breath tickled my skin, and his low and hoarse voice rang out beside my ear. My breath hitched in my throat. My back tightened as he flirted with me, and my cheeks gradually became red and hot. My face changed slightly after understanding what he meant. My eyesight was great. I could see very clearly. On the contrary, it was he who had bad eyesight. Some memories suddenly appeared in my mind. May 20th, which was exactly a month ago, was such a tender and romantic day. The famous singer, Yell Quinn, happened to release a new album on that day, and Jaden chose to publicize his relationship on that day. What he posted on Twitter was very simple. There were only 2 words, followed by a heart emoticon. It read, "My girl." A picture of a woman was uploaded along with the tweet. The woman in the photo was richly bedecked, for she dressed in a fur coat and wore countless luxury goods on her body. Judging from the picture, she looked to be around 330 pounds, was an older woman, and had a kind appearance. In a short time, Jaden's official love declaration became the top trending topic. Jaden's family situation and his early life were terrible. His parents died young, but fortunately, he became famous at a young age, and his career had been smooth sailing ever since. Jaden looked noble and indifferent. He was both good-looking and had great acting skills. He won many prizes and thrived in the industry for many years without scandals. Suffice it to say, he had a good reputation in the industry. When the romance news broke out, the server was flooded with many comments and retweets, and it almost broke down. It was understandable, especially because the woman looked like a nouveau riche. There were many comments. The hottest comment had more than 500,000 likes. The profile picture was of Borden Milk, and the username read, "Deputy Director of Cutvine Eye Disease Research Center." The comment was short and curt. "Hello." The second comment was liked by more than 400,000 users. It was written by the best actor, Eunice Garcia, who was one of Jaden's few friends in the circle. He commented, "Amazing." The third most liked comment was written by Yell, the famous singer who got his trending topic taken away by Jaden's announcement. It was a curse word. In other comments, countless male fans were crying as they wrote their blessings, and more than half of the female fans could not accept their idol's taste in women, so they announced that they would stop being his fans on the spot. I felt like I was struck by lightning. I was not only his fan, but I also wanted to be his wife. Despite my acting degree, prominent and gorgeous facial features, as well as excellent acting skills, I had not been popular for many years. A year ago, I accidentally collaborated with Jaden on a drama series. I even publicly confessed to him on Twitter because I developed feelings for him when we were acting alongside each other, but he avoided me. After Jaden's official announcement, The netizens burst into a frenzy. Jaden would rather be kept by a rich lady old enough to be his mother than accept my confession. At that moment, I became the laughingstock of the internet. Even the tweet, which I confessed to Jaden a year ago, was found by the netizens and became a top trending topic. People laughed, gloated, and scolded me. Of course, I could not bear it. That day, I flew abroad directly, deleted Twitter, threw away my SIM card, and changed my contact information. After hiding for a whole month, I finally made up my mind to come back. Unexpectedly, Jaden bumped into me running out of the director's room that night. He stopped me and even told me to live off of him. Furthermore, he made fun of my eyesight. Thinking of that, I pressed my palm against his chest and struggled hard to push him away. However, he pinned my hands above my head and firmly imprisoned me in that position. I tried to break free, but my efforts were futile. I glared at him fiercely. My eyesight is perfectly fine. I gritted my teeth and did my best to keep calm, trying not to let the emotions that I should not leak out. Jaden stared at me with his dark and unfathomable eyes. He sighed as if he was a little uncomfortable. He then turned his face and asked in a dull voice, "Do you think I look like someone who has a girlfriend?" The atmosphere was still for a moment. I trembled and could not believe it. I did not expect an elegant and aloof man like Jaden to say such shameless words. Did he think that I was a fool or an outdated person who did not surf the internet? I trembled with anger and pushed him away as I questioned, "Do you think that I'm stupid?" Unexpectedly, Jaden glanced at me with eyes full of emotion. His lips were slightly parted, but he didn't say a thing. I let out a bark of laughter out of anger and curled the corner of my lips into a smirk. At that moment, the aura I was exuding was almost glacial. I steadied my breathing and looked up at him after a while. He was looking back at me with a dark look in his eyes. After staring at him for a long time, I suddenly smiled and said, "Do you really want to let me live off you?" He frowned and said nothing. I looked at him with irony in my eyes. He did not even want me when I went up to him before. Now that I came out of the director's room, he suddenly felt that I was precious. "I want you," he said in a low voice. I sneered in my heart and leaned toward him. I wrapped my arms around his neck and pressed my warm lips against his ears. "If you really want to be my sponsor, I have one condition in addition to giving me the resources I deserve." His breathing suddenly became rapid. "What's the condition?" I smiled, splayed my fingers on his warm chest, and rubbed his chest gently. I held in my laughter as my eyes gleamed. His eyes, on the other hand, were gloomy and full of lust. The next second, he picked me up and brought me from the corridor to his room. I fell into a soft bed. He leaned down, and his thin lips fell on the red marks on my collarbone. He bit me harshly as if he wanted to erase the marks left by others earlier. I trembled and raised my chin slightly. When he kissed all the way along the collarbone, I, too, kissed him naturally. My words overflowed between our lips and teeth. "I want money." Without an ounce of hesitation, he said in a low voice. "Okay." I pushed him away slightly, gasped for a while, looked up at him, and smiled casually. "I want $312,000, and I want it today." He still promised me and kissed me again. "Okay." My eyes were filled with tears. "Somehow," I suddenly said without thinking, "I want you to break up with that old baby of yours." He stopped and looked a little confused. Old before he could finish, I kissed him again and gritted my teeth. Forget it. I really did not want to hear his girlfriend's name from his mouth. That night, I held his shoulders harshly. My heart felt like it was soaked in acid, and the feeling almost devoured me. We did not sleep until we were completely exhausted. The music was noisy, and the lights were dim. I saw the rich woman who might weigh 330 pounds sitting lazily on the couch in the room. Jaden stood beside her. The woman took a puff of smoke from the cigar in her hand and smiled at Jaden. "Babe, come on, sit on my lap." Jaden was stunned, hesitant, and unable to move. The woman's smile froze. After a while, she narrowed her eyes and questioned him. "Then, should I leave?" Jaden's pupils suddenly shrank. He frowned and finally made up his mind. As soon as he took a step toward her, I rushed over and dragged him away. "No, don't go over there." Jaden was shocked and looked at me in disbelief. "And Natalie, what are you doing here?" I stared at his face, and the jealousy in my heart suddenly intensified as I chided him sadly. "Do you know she's old enough to be your mother?" When he heard this, Jaden's face paled, and his eyes turned red. His expression made my heart ache. I clutched his arm tightly and could not help crying hysterically. "Why did you choose her? Am I not good enough for you?" After I said that, the room was enveloped by pin-drop silence. Jaden glanced at the woman subconsciously. She was graceful and rich, and the faint blue light cast a glow on her luxurious fur coat. He withdrew his gaze and pursed his lips. After a long time, he closed his eyes and parted his lips, saying, "I'm sorry." I felt suffocated, and I kept shaking my head. I watched him tear my hands away bit by bit, and there was a deep and dark emotion in his eyes. "She's giving me too much." "No!" I jolted awake from my dream and opened my eyes. It was the next morning, and the morning light was seeping through the window. I was sore and weak all over, and I had some unspeakable pain somewhere. A warm breath fell on my neck. I turned my head stiffly and saw Jaden's beautiful face. He smiled. Evidently, he had slept soundly and had a completely different experience from me, who had a nightmare. I stared at him expressionlessly for a while, then stretched out my hand to touch his forehead. I slid my hand down the contour of his face, past his closed eyes and straight nose bridge. My hand finally stopped on his thin lips. My eyes darkened, and my heart hurt badly. Did his girlfriend ever touch him there? Suddenly, an arm was wrapped around my waist, pulling me toward Jaden. I was completely caught off guard and ended up snuggling into his broad chest. "Natalie," he whispered and placed his jaw above my head. My body suddenly stiffened. He buried his head and rubbed his lips against my neck. His hot lips and breath touched my skin, and it made me feel a little itchy. I hesitated for a moment and raised my head slightly. It was then I noticed that his eyes were still closed, and he was sleeping soundly. My heart skipped a beat. "So," he subconsciously uttered my name. Did that mean he actually liked me as much as I liked him? A buzz sounded, which startled me. I was pulled back to reality in an instant. Turning my head, I saw the phone beside my pillow light up. My phone number was just obtained yesterday when I returned home, and there was only one contact in it for the time being. Could it be? My breathing became tense as I carefully moved the big hand on my waist and reached out to get the phone. I unlocked the phone and clicked on the notification. It was a very concise text message. It read, "You should come to the audition that's happening a week from now." I was stunned. My fingertips trembled slightly, and an unrestrained joy spread all over my body. Every cell of my body was trembling with excitement. Who sent the text message? Why are you so happy? A magnetic low and hoarse voice sounded in my ear. I smiled brightly, touched the words on the screen with my fingers again, and answered without paying much attention. "Mr. Campbell." Surprise came over me only after I uttered my reply. Jaden had woken up. In an instant, I felt the air above my head become heavy. Suddenly, something occurred to me, and I blinked. Yesterday, I ran out of Quade Campbell's room and bumped into Jaden. I turned my head stiffly. Before I could see the expression of Jaden next to me, he held my waist and pulled me into his arms. Then, Jaden leaned over. His breath invaded my pores, and it made my body tremble slightly. He looked down at me, and I looked at him too, my breath hastening. Jaden's eyes were very beautiful. They appeared cold and emotionless, but presently, a gloomy look could be seen in his eyes, as if his mood was somewhat bad. I stared at him and got distracted again. In a trance, I remembered the day I first met Jaden a year ago. I was shooting an urban drama series and was acting as the second female lead, who was a vicious character. All those years, Jaden and I had never met each other, nor crossed paths with one another. On that day, the actor acting opposite me left temporarily as he had something urgent to attend to. The main character, Eunice, saw Jaden in the neighborhood and got him to join the film crew to save the scene. That was the first time we acted together. Moreover, it was a scene in the bathroom. I vaguely remembered that the lighting was dim and romantic that night. The warm water washed down from the top of my head, and I was enveloped in fog. The reserved and elegant man suddenly raised his hand, slowly unbuttoned a button on his shirt, then leaned over to me and closed the distance between us. He stared at me then like he was staring at me presently. "Ouch!" I hissed. There was a sharp pain on the corner of my lips. I took a deep breath and instinctively glared at him as I muttered, "Jaden, are you a dog?" Jaden pressed his forehead against mine and licked his lips. "What were you thinking about just now?" Something flashed in my mind. My heart pounded crazily. But I forced myself to calm down and looked at him provocatively. "I'm thinking about you." He stared at me and swallowed hard. "But do you believe it?" I smiled slyly with a charming look in my eyes. He frowned as a storm brewed in his gaze. He tilted his head slightly, and his lips brushed over my face and pressed against my ear. "Natalie, if I hadn't called Mr. Campbell last night and said that I was already at the door, would you two have continued what you were doing?" I was a little surprised. "Quaid did receive a call last night, after hanging up the phone." He smiled meaningfully and said, "Someone is jealous. You'd better go back first." It turned out that Jaden was the one who made the call. Wait, so he did it on purpose? Jaden was a little away from me, and his cold hand was on my collarbone. The red marks had not yet disappeared, and he suddenly pressed down on them. "Where else did he touch you besides here?" His tone was ice cold. My heart skipped a beat. Annoyance and gloominess churned in my heart, and I could not breathe smoothly. In his heart, was I really the kind of woman who did whatever she could to become popular? Did I ever do those things when I got along with him this year? Was he blind? Couldn't he see it? However, in a moment, I came to an understanding. Jaden had always been cold to me, and everything about me had nothing to do with him. So naturally, he would not pay attention to it. I could not help but lower my head, and there was a feeling of sadness in my heart. Suddenly, he held my face, and his fingers habitually rolled over. His eyes were dark. "Natalie, answer my question." I tried my best to control myself. I raised my chin, curled my red lips into a grin, and said coldly, "Why don't you take a guess?" He breathed heavily. "Natalie, for the sake of resources, you really..." He paused. His lips moved, and the line of his lips tightened, but he did not say anything more. "What about you?" However, I would not let him go. "Aren't you the same as me?" I sniffed, and some inexplicable feeling of grievance welled up in me. I blurted out impulsively, "We both use our bodies to get what we want. Are you any better than me?" Jaden was stunned by my roar. He was confused at first, but his eyes were gradually clouded over by complexity and gloom. I stared at the change of expression on his face, and my heart seemed to tighten with unease. He finally spoke in a helpless tone. "Natalie, my relationship with Mr. Reyes is not what you think." I was stunned. "Mr. Reyes? Simon Reyes?" I was shocked, and the image of a middle-aged man with a balding head and a big belly immediately appeared in my mind. I forgot to mention something. Jaden's first film was shot by Simon. Simon was an internationally renowned director, and Jaden won the Best Actor award that year with his superb acting skills. Thus, Jaden became a leading actor whom Simon employed regularly and became famous ever since. Jaden's voice continued in my ear. "Although I have been acting in Mr. Reyes' work for several years, we are in a legitimate partnership. He is my respected elder. There is no discord between us." I suddenly realized that he thought that I was talking about him serving director Simon. I stared at his dark and deep eyes and enunciated, "You know I'm not talking about Mr. Reyes." Jaden was stunned for a second and seemed to understand something. He looked at me and spoke with a deep and melancholic tone. "Natalie, I have nothing to do with Eunice as you thought." "That's enough," I shouted, my voice trembling slightly. At that moment, it felt as if my throat was blocked. I knew that Jaden was playing dumb. Simon, the director who propelled him to fame, and Eunice, a good friend of his in the industry for many years, had been mentioned by him as shields, yet he did not mention his rich girlfriend. Was it because he was guilty? Well, what other reason could there be? The next second, I pushed him away, quickly turned over, got out of bed, and ran to the door. Before I touched the doorknob, Jaden hugged me from behind. He grabbed my wrist and pressed me against the wall by the door. I took a deep breath and yelled, "Jaden!" Jaden leaned over, and I could feel his hot and damp breath on my ear. "Are you going to go out like this?" My eyelids twitched. As the bright light shone on me, I realized that I was only wearing a silk spaghetti strap nightgown. Because of the tugging earlier, the shoulder strap slipped off one side, and a large mottled mark appeared with the fluctuation of my chest. If I bumped into the paparazzi in this state, I would become the top trending topic. Perhaps I would even fail the audition that was set to happen a week later. My eyes darkened, and I was a little frustrated. I glared at him, then roughly stretched out my hand to hook the strap. Just as I was about to pull the strap up, my fingers were wrapped by a big hand. My pupils narrowed, for I was startled. What was he trying to do? While I was in a daze, Jaden's thin and defined hand held me, then gently lifted my fingers and brought the strap back to its original position. He moved very gently as if he was afraid of hurting me. If you use as much strength as you did just now, this nightgown will also be damaged like the dress you were wearing last night. Hearing that, I gritted my teeth with hatred. Was he not the one who damaged the red dress I wore last night? Certainly. He would know exactly how it was damaged. Jaden rubbed the skin on my shoulder with his fingers. His voice was so low and raspy, I could not read his emotions at all. If you really don't want to stay with me, I'll ask my assistant to bring you a clean set of clothes. It won't take much time. You can leave after that. He put his arms around my waist and burrowed his face into my shoulder. Natalie, just stay with me for half an hour. As I took in the pleasant fragrance on his body, for some reason, I became misty-eyed. What on earth was wrong with me? Why did I seduce him even though I knew he had a girlfriend? Why did I get myself into such a situation? Half an hour later, Jaden's assistant arrived. He was a young man in his 20s, with slightly curled hair and a bright smile. He was not surprised to see me, and he said sweetly, "Natalie, I've brought the clothes over." My face was slightly hot. I took the clothes stiffly and suddenly felt that something was wrong. I turned my head and asked Jaden, "Where's Caleb? Did you change your assistant?" Jaden lifted his eyes and nodded placidly, humming a nonchalant response as he did so. On the other hand, a strange look flitted across his assistant's face when he heard the name. "Caleb, Natalie. You know that Caleb's." He paused in the middle of his sentence and scratched his head. A worried look crossed his visage. It was as if there was something he could not say. I frowned slightly. I did not know Caleb Zenos very well. All I remembered was that he had fair skin, big eyes, and an above-average appearance. As a normal person, he looked better than many celebrities in the industry. Jaden had always taken good care of Caleb, so why did he suddenly change his assistant? I opened my mouth and was about to ask when Jaden's phone rang. Jaden looked at the name on the screen and hung up. A few seconds later, the phone rang again. This time, Jaden frowned. I stole a glance at his phone screen and saw the name, Shiana Sanchez. My vision paused on the screen. Shiana Sanchez. Obviously, that was a woman's name. Could she be his girlfriend? My body stiffened again. Answer it. Maybe there's something important. After the phone rang several times, I urged him to answer it as if I was not bothered, but my face gradually turned pale. Jaden froze for a moment. He looked at me with his deep eyes and said, "Okay." I looked down. After a while, I saw Jaden answering the call. The room was very quiet, and a delicate and whimpering female voice rang out. I could hear her crystal clear. "Jaden, you finally answered my call." "Jaden," she addressed him intimately. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. When I came back to my senses, I noticed Jaden's dark and unfathomable gaze. It turned out that he had finished making the phone call. Jaden looked at me apologetically. "Natalie, I'm sorry. There might be something I have to deal with later." In other words, he was driving me away. My heart trembled. Although I intended to leave, I still felt a chill in my heart when I heard Jaden utter the words to drive me away. "I'll take my leave right away." I quickly wiped the corners of my eyes and turned around to leave, but Jaden's voice came from behind. "Wait!" I sniffled and grinned. I knew he was reluctant to let me leave. Then, Jaden's cold and steady voice traveled through the air and into my ears. "Have a safe trip, Natalie." My smile froze. Jaden seemed to realize something was amiss, so he quickly explained, be careful on the road. Take care, don't be caught by the paparazzi." And he paused for a moment as if he was thinking about his words before continuing. "After returning home, remember to prepare for the audition for Mr. Campbell's new series a week later." I was completely stunned. I turned my head and looked at him in disbelief. I could not figure out what he was thinking. He was obviously jealous when he asked about what Quaid and I did last night. But now he was pretending to be classy and asked me to prepare for his rival's audition. What a hypocrite he was. At that thought, an idea suddenly popped up in my mind. The colors began to drain from my face as I pursed my lips. Could it be that after Jaden finished making that call, he suddenly woke up and decided to get rid of me and devote himself to his girlfriend? Perhaps he wanted to take advantage of the audition and send me to Quaid? Jaden sent me out and arranged for his assistant to drive me home. Sitting in the back seat of the car, My body stiffened suddenly. There was a faint smell of jasmine in the car. It smelled exactly the same as the scent on Jaden last night. 5 Back in my apartment. I did not contact my assistant or agent immediately. It was useless to contact them. My agent had several artists who had full schedules and did not have time to care about me. As for my assistant, I did not have any friends in the circle. Only my assistant had a good relationship with me. However, long before I went abroad, I heard that her parents were ill, so I gave her a long holiday. Thus, I had to do everything by myself, including sourcing resources, image maintenance, arranging for food, clothing, housing, transportation, and other daily matters. It took me a week to memorize the lines of the whole script, and I carefully studied the characters over and over again to seize the hard-earned opportunity. It could be said that I was determined to get the role of the heroine in Bewitching Concubine. I devoted myself to the script and was so busy that I did not even have time to eat. But then I realized something. Jaden did not contact me throughout the entire week. It seemed like he was really going to cut ties with me completely. The night before the audition, I stayed up all night reading the script. When it was almost dawn, I lay on the couch and took a quick nap. In a daze, I had another dream. I vaguely recall having dreamt about what happened to Jaden, Eunice, and me while we were in the same film crew a year ago. In my dream, I was lying on the chair as I read the script. Seeing that Jaden had come to save the day, I was so shocked that my hand trembled and the script fell to the ground with a thud. I hurriedly squatted down to pick up the script. At that moment, a slender and pale hand suddenly appeared in front of me and picked the script up first. I seemed to have felt a cold sensation brushing past my fingertips. My body stiffened slightly, and I raised my eyes. Jaden was dressed in a white shirt and black trousers. He had wide shoulders and a narrow waist. With a single glance, I could tell that he had an excellent figure. However, the neckline of the shirt was tightly buttoned. He had a cold expression plastered on his visage. While his gaze appeared cold and reserved, there was a seductive but restrained air about him. He was looking at me with those deep and dark eyes of his. "I thought you wouldn't come." Eunice came over and tossed us a meaningful glance. Jaden held the script in one hand, while his other hand was in his pocket. He glanced at Eunice lazily and said nothing. Unbothered, Eunice turned to look at me. "This is Natalie, who I told you about before." Then, he raised his eyebrows at Jaden and questioned the latter. "Well, I'm right, aren't I? Natalie is even more beautiful in real life." My heart skipped a beat, and I subconsciously wanted to see the expression on Jaden's face. Unfortunately, Jaden was expressionless. He ignored Eunice's words and slowly swept his gaze across the script. Then, he handed it to me. His tone was indifferent when he uttered, "I've seen your acting in monochrome. It's great. Compared to drama series, you are more suitable to act in movies." My heart skipped a beat. Monochrome was my first and only movie. I played a blind girl who was trapped in darkness and mire but tried to pursue the light. It was a tense literary film with little popularity. I did not expect Jaden to have seen it. I was inexplicably emotional. I lowered my eyelids, took the script from him, and said in a low voice, "Thank you." When I first asked him to come, this guy hung up the phone before I finished speaking. Eunice's eyes darted between us. His gaze was meaningful, and it seemed like he was determined to matchmake us to the end. Later, I sent him a message on WhatsApp, saying that you'd be acting opposite him. Guess what, Natalie? He came in less than 10 minutes. Hearing this, I looked up at Jaden. Natalie. Jaden's face was still devoid of emotions. He merely gave Eunice a warning look before fixing his gaze on me. "Please don't have the wrong idea." I lowered my eyes, my lips moving slightly. "Okay, I won't." Jaden seemed to be at a loss for words. He looked at me and then turned to Eunice, who was watching us. He switched the topic. "Mr. Reyes is having a birthday party next Wednesday. Come with me." Eunice came back to his senses from watching the dramatic scene unfold in front of him. His expression became slightly stiff, and he refused. "I'm not going." I looked at Eunice and instantly came to a realization. Eunice used to be the leading actor for the internationally acclaimed director, Simon. His acting came naturally to him, and because of that, he won many awards. However, Eunice had a strange hobby. Every time he got the Best Actor award, he would reward himself by playing a bossy CEO in a drama series. Simon was so angry as he thought that Eunice did not cherish his opportunities. If it went on, Eunice would gradually lose his appeal. However, Eunice was also stubborn. He did not want to listen to Simon and wanted to do things his own way. In the end, the two went their separate ways unhappily and refused to greet one another when they bumped into each other. Jaden raised his eyebrows. Just as he was about to say something, Eunice interrupted him. Wait a minute. Eunice frowned. You promised to do this not because of Natalie, but because you want me to go to Simon's party. Am I right? I was stunned. Jaden glanced at him and said, "You're not too stupid." It turned out that I had misunderstood him earlier. When I woke up, I was in a daze and spacing out while hugging a pillow. It seemed that even my dreams were implying something to me. Whether it was a year ago or now, it seemed that it was me who had misunderstood. 7. Seeing that Jaden was also one of the judges, I bit my lower lip slightly. There was no change in my expression, but my heart skipped a beat. There were only 3 judges in total. One was a former colleague who gave me preferential treatment, and the other was a current lover who had slept with me several times. There was only one person left with little power to reject me. It seemed that Roxanne was right. I would succeed in the audition steadily. Damn it. I was being pretentious. After the staff left, there was only the sound of 3 people breathing in the audition hall. Quaid glanced at Jaden and then looked at me with ambiguous eyes as he smiled. Natalie, we were just talking about your past. I frowned and looked at him in surprise. It almost occurred to me that Jaden looked unhappy just now. Was it because of what Quaid said? Quaid stared at me for a few seconds and suddenly raised his eyebrows. Why are you so nervous? I just talked with Jaden about the interesting things that happened while filming Monochrome and exchanged our thoughts. I didn't expect that he and I had many ideas about the movie, which were very co-productive. And he paused and looked at me with deep eyes. Suddenly, he lowered his eyes and laughed in a low voice. Our taste is the same. Even a fool could recognize what he meant. I bit my lips and did not understand what Quaid wanted to do. He did pursue me after he stopped filming Monochrome 5 years ago. Later, I saw him flirting with other women at the same time, but he looked indifferent. He calmly put on his clothes and did not even look at me. I've always been playing with you. So, what was going on presently? At that time, Jaden, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly said, Natalie, I won't do that to you. I suddenly looked at him, and my heart suddenly skipped a beat. I seemed to understand what he said, but I did not seem to understand what he meant completely. Suddenly, I remembered something. That day, I opened the door of the hotel. Quaid indifferently said that he was just playing with me. After that, the paparazzi and reporters followed closely behind him and squeezed in. That day, Twitter was exploding with the news. The famous singer Yell cursed and announced that his new album launch event would be postponed. At that time, Quaid was already a genius director in everyone's eyes, and I was just an ordinary and transparent person. The marketing accounts had written a lot about him and the woman, but my name was not even written in it. The whole time, I was written as an unknown actress. When I came back to my senses from the anger, I suddenly realized a problem. What did Jaden mean? I could not breathe, and my eyes were fixed on Jaden. In an instant, an almost impossible guess came out of my heart. Has he been paying attention to me since then? It did not seem impossible. After all, he had seen my part in Monochrome. Natalie, I'm not like him, Jaden repeated. His tone was as cold as his aura. It was as frosty as ice that could not be melted. But at the same time, there was some other meaning. I blinked and looked at him with my heart beating very fast. He looked at me. His eyes gradually turned from indifference to gentleness, and his thin lips opened lightly. He was sincere and confident. He's a jerk. I'm not. As soon as Jaden finished his words, a woman's laughter suddenly came from the door. Oh, has the audition started? Why didn't you to wait for me? I looked back subconsciously, and then my pupils shrank slightly. The woman looked in her early 50s. She was bloated, dressed with jewelry, and had delicate and shiny skin which was well maintained. She looked exactly the same as the lady in Jaden's picture. My face turned pale, and my fingertips were cold. I did not expect that the third judge would be Jaden's girlfriend. When the woman saw me, she suddenly said, "T.S." She twisted her waist and walked over, looking at me from head to toe, and then smiled at Jaden and Quaid. This face alone can afford the title of bewitching concubine. I hurriedly lowered my head, and my heart trembled. What's more, I was embarrassed. Quaid laughed. Yes. When I first met Natalie, Jaden interrupted him and said in a cold voice, Natalie, which scene are you going to show us? I came to my senses like I had just woken up from a dream and looked up at Jaden. My thoughts were a mess. I did not understand why he could be so calm in such a terrible situation. Besides, he knew that the woman was also one of the judges. Why did he not remind me earlier and let me prepare well? I frowned. Something flashed through my mind, but it flashed by too fast that I did not know what it was. I suppressed the anxiety in my chest, took a deep breath, and tried to keep as calm as I could. I'm going to try out with the 7th scene. Jaden's girlfriend glanced at the script, pondered, and raised her eyebrows at Jaden. This is a famous scene in this movie. Why don't you act with her? Jaden, my pupils narrowed. The scene was technically intimate, but she, looking at her lazy and indifferent eyes, I bit my lips and felt ashamed. Sure enough, one could not judge a book by its cover. Perhaps only such a free and generous woman could make Jaden, who was indifferent and abstinent, crazy in love and officially publicize their relationship. I looked up at Jaden and saw that he was obviously stunned. Then he smiled at Suzette and said, okay. As he withdrew his gaze, the emotion in his eyes faded. 6. It was 10 in the morning. On the 4th floor of the Splendor Studio, the auditions for the roles in Mr. Campbell's new film, Bewitching Concubine, were being held. Quaid Campbell, he was only 25 years old, and he was the youngest genius director in the circle. He had a unique style and was recalcitrant. In the past 5 years, he had only made 2 films. The first film was unpopular, and it was not well received. In the same year, with his second film, he swept up all of the major international awards and became famous. After finishing his second film, he suddenly went abroad to study and did not return home until recently. Now that he was making a big comeback, he could be said to be the most popular person in the eyes of the actors. I glanced over and found that the huge lounge was almost full of people, except for a few newcomers. Most of them were first-tier and second-tier actresses with popularity. It could be called the gathering of stars. While waiting, I suddenly heard 2 actresses whispering together. Have you heard that this role has already been determined? Now it's just a process. I paused and looked away from the script. I looked up at them. The actress who was talking was called Roxanne. She looked pure and sweet, and her resources were also good. She was not good at acting, so her shows all flopped. The other actress was a little surprised and leaned toward her. What? Who is it? Before Roxanne could say anything, she seemed to think of something. Could it be Shiana? She became famous overnight because of the advertisement she acted in with Jaden. My eyes widened in shock, and my brain stopped working instantly. Was Jaden's old baby also in the entertainment industry? Roxanne shook her head. It's not her. The other actress obviously did not believe it. Shiana appeared out of the blue a month ago. Her first gig was to cooperate with Jaden. She became popular after 1 month of her debut, but there was no further capital to help her. Who will believe it? I heard that Jaden was her college senior, and they had a close personal relationship. Who else can it be but her? The more I overheard their conversation, the stranger I felt. Was Jaden Shiana's college senior? I frowned. I was more certain that Shiana was not Jaden's old baby. Who was Shiana? Roxanne pursed her lips and spoke after a long while. No matter how good Shiana's resources are, she can't be better than that someone who can read the script. Another actress was surprised. Someone? Reading the script? What information did you get? I stared at Roxanne with a bad feeling in my heart. Roxanne smiled, and a dark light flashed in her eyes. Someone has been entangled with Jaden for a whole year. I thought she was in love with him. Just a week ago, the paparazzi caught her coming out of Mr. Campbell's room in a mess. If someone hadn't immediately suppressed the news, it would have become a piece of explosive news. The other actress's eyes widened suddenly. She did not understand. So you mean Natalie? A loud voice sounded at the door. The 2 people suddenly froze, looked at each other, and looked back at me in a daze. Their originally beautiful faces suddenly lost color. When the uniformed staff saw me, they immediately waved to me. It's your turn. I stood up and walked out slowly. When I passed by them, I paused slightly and smiled casually. If your acting skills were half as good as your gossiping skills, you would have won all the awards. After saying that, I walked straight to the door regardless of Roxanne's ugly expression. Bewitching Concubine was written by Suzette. a great scriptwriter for Splendor Corp. It took years for her to polish the script alone, and she deliberately invited Quaid to shoot it. It could be said that she wrote it to win an award. I came back for it a month ago, when I was relaxing abroad. I happened to meet Quaid. He was wearing a black trench coat with his hands in his trouser pockets, and his eyebrows were both familiar and strange. At first, he seemed a little surprised to see me, but a moment later, he smiled, and his brown eyes were glistening. "Natalie, I've been preparing for a movie recently. I'm picking the heroine. Do you want to read the script?" I narrowed my eyes at him, seeing that I did not speak. He looked at me more intensely, but the smile on his lips became more and more casual, and he approached me. "Don't think that I'm giving you preferential treatment. After reading the script, even if you are really interested in acting, you have to pass my preliminary test first, and then go to the company to participate in the audition." I smiled carelessly, but the smile did not reach my eyes. "Why do you think I can still act in your movie?" "Yes." Why would he think that I would fail by working with the same person again? "Oh, I forgot to mention that my first film Monochrome was directed by Quaid." He smiled and hummed, "Are you still angry with me?" I gave him a big eye roll, accompanied by a curse word, and turned my head and left. However, in the end, I returned back to the country with Quaid. After reading the script, I only had one sentence in my mind. "Ah, this is really interesting." As for that night, when Jaden found me coming out of Quaid's room, we were really practicing for the show. Rather, it was a test given to me by the Quaid. The red marks on my collarbone, which Jaden minded a lot, were all made by me in order to better integrate into the character. I pinched myself viciously and endured despite the pain. "We're here." The staff's curt and concise words pulled me back to reality. I calmed down, thanked him politely, and then looked up at the judge's seat. There were 3 soft chairs in total. Sitting in the middle was Quaid. He crossed his legs and looked sideways, with some interest in his eyes. The seat on his right was empty. It seemed that someone was not there because they had something on, but their clothes were still on it. It was a gorgeous fur coat that looked somewhat familiar. On his left side, it was so surprising. Jaden was sitting next to him as he stared at me expressionlessly. The most troublesome thing about costume drama was makeup. Sometimes it would take a long time just to set the hairstyle alone. However, it was just an audition, so I only changed into a film costume. My makeup was still the light makeup I did before I came, and I just reapplied lipstick. I opened the dressing room door and did not expect Jaden to wait for me at the entrance. He had changed into a dark red robe with black embroidery on his cuffs. His expression was solemn and dignified. At that moment, I thought I had really seen the third prince from the movie Bewitching Concubine. When Jaden saw me, darkness slowly appeared in his eyes. His Adam's apple seemed to move a little. "You look gorgeous." I pursed my lips tightly and said nothing. He stretched out his hand and seemed to want to touch my face. I suddenly backed away, and then under his flabbergasted gaze, I closed the dressing room door. Bang! As expected, there was a rhythmic knock on the door outside. Jaden's knock on the door was also very characteristic. It was steady and sturdy, with a moderate rhythm, like the swinging sound of a pendulum clock. I lifted my head, took a deep breath, and said sullenly, "Stop knocking. I won't come out even if you knock until your fingers are injured." There was silence outside, as if he was thinking, but soon he began to knock on the door again. However, his movements were much lighter. My frustration instantly overwhelmed me, and my voice was a little furious. "Can you please leave first? I'll go out after you leave." As soon as I finished speaking, the atmosphere was so quiet that it seemed as if the air was still. The sound of breathing was audible. After a while, Jaden said, "Although this scene is about the female lead cheating on the emperor with the third prince, the female lead has experienced too many betrayals and bloodshed, so now she has gone into a state of extreme nervousness. In short, crazy is the word to describe her." The person who auditioned for this scene just now only showed the charm of the female lead when she deliberately seduced the third prince, but did not illustrate her madness. Later, "You just need to." He suddenly paused and smiled. "What am I worrying about? You've always been good at acting. I should trust you." His voice was a little blurry through the door, but it sounded sincere. However, it sounded particularly harsh to me. I felt like I was seriously ill. I would rather Jaden scold me, be disgusted with me, and blame me for the guilt of that night's wild downfall, then nonchalantly teach me acting techniques as if we did not do something that hurt her girlfriend. Plus, it seemed he wanted to maintain a romantic relationship with me for the long term. I clenched my fingers, and Suzette's face suddenly appeared in my mind beyond my control. My heart tightened. I suddenly felt that the whole situation was meaningless. Jaden, I regret it. I shouldn't have been obsessed with you. Just pretend I didn't ask you to keep me as a mistress that night. We're both adults and should know how to stop while we're still ahead. Natalie, I said firmly, after today, don't contact me privately except for the necessary official business. I lowered my eyes and uttered the words clearly, but suddenly felt exhausted. From now on, we mind our own business. Before I could finish my words, the door was unlocked with a click. The next second, Jaden's tall and well-built body squeezed in instantly. The area before my eyes suddenly darkened. Before I could react, he grabbed my wrist and pulled me into his arms. I don't agree. I heard Jaden's hoarse voice, unfriendly as usual, but now his breath was a little unstable. He cupped one side of my face with one hand and forced me to look up. That extremely unemotional face gradually appeared in my sight. I became enraged and was so furious that I cursed. It's none of my business whether you agree or not. His gaze immediately turned icy like a blizzard. He said word by word, Natalie, you provoked me first. When I was halfway through swearing, his impactful statement forced me to stop talking. He maintained his position and looked at me quietly with his sharp eyes. He suddenly asked, do you remember how you confessed your love to me on Twitter a year ago? My eyelashes trembled, and I bit my lips while looking at him. He stared at me with darkness in his eyes. With punctuation, you said 15 words in total. My heart was pounding with some inexplicable emotions building up inside me. I closed my eyes and shouted, I don't remember. Sooner or later, Jaden will belong to me. My out-of-control voice and Jaden's calm voice sounded at the same time. I looked up at him, and my face was totally flushed, and some fragmented memories flashed through my mind. In fact, the confession of love to Jaden I posted on Twitter a year ago was an accident. We were working in the same industry. If I really confessed my love openly to a top star on Twitter, others would inevitably suspect I wanted to create hype. Not to mention, the film I acted in with Jaden was in the promotional period. That move definitely gave haters a chance to attack me online. The truth was, I was drunk. I was never a fan of alcohol, but that day was Jaden's rap party, and I could not help making an exception. He only stayed with the film crew for 10 days, but I could not help falling in love with him within those short 10 days. I got drunk that night. When I got home, I shakily took out my phone, logged into my main account, and boldly posted on Twitter, sooner or later, Jaden will belong to me. But, perhaps at that time, Jaden also thought that I deliberately acted as a couple with him for popularity, putting on a show to tell people that we fell in love during filming, and setting an affectionate persona for myself. In his mind, the whole incident was staged by me. Otherwise, there was no other way to explain what happened later. During Jaden's 10 days with the film crew, we got along very well and often discussed the script together. When we had different opinions, he would listen to me calmly and then remain cool-headed when analyzing how the scene should be played out. When we thought the same, he would look at me calmly with a faint smile, portraying the unique elegance of an ink painting. His face was as perfect as jade, and he was a natural beauty. He clearly treated me differently at the beginning. After the confession, I nervously went to him and wanted to go with the flow and confess my feelings to him in person. However, he ignored me and gave me an excuse to leave before I could say anything. He acted as if I was a stranger. The following year was no different. He was even colder, which made me try my best to pursue him. Yet, he never even looked at me from the beginning to the end. A strand of my hair scattered, and Jaden naturally raised his hand to hook it behind my ear. His action made me regain my thoughts. Jaden looked askance at me. You even mentioned me after you confessed your love to me on Twitter that day. He paused and laughed faintly. 3 times. He looked at me as if he had other thoughts. As if you were afraid that I wouldn't see it. I retorted, it's all over. My ears were so red that they could bleed any time. I was really drunk at that time. When I realized what I had done, I planned to delete the tweet to destroy the evidence. My mushy brain made me look at Twitter repeatedly, thinking that the message could be deleted by posting it 3 times. Jaden smiled slightly and wanted to say something more. Suddenly, there were 2 heavy knocks on the door. Shortly afterward, a very unfriendly voice sounded. "Are you guys going to join the audition?" I was stunned. It was Quaid. 9 Jaden. Quaid. And I walked in silence. Quaid asked me inadvertently, "Natalie, what were both of you doing in the dressing room?" I lowered my head and answered without hesitation, "We were changing clothes." After saying that, I snapped back to my senses. When I looked up, I caught sight of Quaid's darkened expression. I could not explain myself any further. Ever since I found Quaid sleeping with another woman 5 years ago, no matter what I had thought about him in the past, I knew it would be impossible for us to be together. Now, he was only my film director. That was it. Seeing that I did not say anything, Quaid looked intently at me. Jaden was in a good mood. He smiled and said, "Of course. You change your clothes in the dressing room. Some things can only be done at home." Quaid looked even grimmer. Back in the studio, the 3 of us had different expressions. Only Suzette got excited when she saw me and Jaden all dressed up. "You look like the hero and heroine from the book." Quaid's breathing got heavier. He cast a glance at Jaden and me. "Natalie, you can begin." The lights around us suddenly dimmed. Bewitching Concubine was the story of Wenna, who lived a very short life. Wenna was a first-rank female official in the royal court. During the years of the Reformation, her family was framed, their assets were confiscated, and the entire family was sentenced to death for treason. However, Wenna managed to escape. In order to find out the truth, Wenna became a concubine of the king. She quickly rose among the ranks of her fellow concubines because of her good looks. The 7th scene of the film was with Wenna's former fellow official in the court. The 3rd prince, Yahir, was beginning to doubt her identity and had sneaked into her bedroom at midnight to test her. I leaned lazily on the couch when I noticed someone approaching me from behind. I gave a faint smile. "Why are you here in the middle of the night? Aren't you afraid that your father, the king, will come to know about it?" The man's breath suddenly got heavier. The air seemed to stagnate in the room. Yahir spoke in a cool tone after a long while. "You are Wenna." Shocked, I covered my mouth and laughed. The golden hairpin on my head rustled as my head moved. I turned around to face Yahir. "You're so brash and blunt. That has always been your style." The 3rd prince's pupils contracted, and his eyes darkened. I got up from the couch and slowly walked toward him barefoot, resting my face on his chest. I called out softly, "Yahir." Only Wenna would call him Yahir. Yahir's body stiffened, and he panted heavily. His hands were trembling as he uttered a sentence with much difficulty. "You're not dead." My eyes darkened, and I pushed him away gently. Looking at my fellow official, there was a trace of indescribable charm in my eyes. I grabbed his shirt and breathed lightly into his ear. "It's me. I'm Wenna, the one who was sentenced to death together with my family. I'm not dead. Are you happy to know that?" "Yahir, what are you trying to do?" Yahir shouted. I raised my eyebrows and traced his shirt with my finger. I smiled seductively at him. "What do you think I'm trying to do?" He pursed his lips and grabbed my hand. "You know what I mean." He paused and said in a low voice, "Isn't it enough to kill those who framed you? Why did you kill Mr. Larson? He didn't do anything to you." My expression remained unchanged, but my hand was a little cold. I said calmly, "It was an accident." Yahir looked at me in disbelief. I stretched out a hand and smiled at him. My fair and slender fingers were glowing under the candlelight. "Yahir, do you know that once my hands are stained with blood, I can never go back? At this point, I would rather err on the side of caution. I would rather kill them all than make a mistake." "Wenna, you're crazy." Hearing this, I stared at him gloomily and said, "Yes, I'm crazy." I suddenly pounced on Yahir and caught him off guard. I sat on him, staring at his stunned expression. I ripped off my clothes, revealing a large area of my chest. My skin looked more provocative with those hideous-looking scars. He looked at the bruises on my collarbone, which were a result of being tortured. His pupils suddenly dilated. "You." He stopped talking and did not finish his sentence. I lowered my head and nibbled at his throat. "Do you want to go crazy together with me?" 10J Aiden, who was pressed to the ground by me, was stunned for a moment. He looked at me quietly and swallowed hard. I pretended to be calm and got up from him, trying to keep my confused feelings in check. Addressing the crowd, I said aloud, My performance is over. The script did not mention anything about nibbling his throat or the last line I said. I added them to the scene myself. The scene flashed across my mind. Jaden's eyes were red, and he looked perplexed. He appeared to be surprised and hurt at the same time. There was even a tinge of jealousy. His gaze was about to burn me alive. He had never looked at me so passionately when we were not filming. A terrible feeling came upon me. Did you nip at it the last time? Jaden deliberately lowered his voice as he inched closer to me. I was stunned, but I immediately realized what he was talking about. He was referring to my performance during the audition, when I nipped at his collarbone without flinching at all. I blushed and nodded. Yes. Jaden's eyes suddenly lit up. Then he seemed to think of something again and frowned slightly. After some hesitation, he asked, "You bit me just now. The last time, did you?" I knew what he was going to say. I didn't bite him there, Quaid, and I didn't do anything that night. We were just acting out a scene together. I finished acting out the entire scene for the audition alone. After saying that, I looked up at Jaden and saw the joy in his eyes. He had fallen into a stupor. At that moment, my thoughts were interrupted by a loud voice. Natalie Yates, you are amazing. Jaden's girlfriend stood up from her seat and clapped. I like your performance very much. You're so natural and full of emotion. You are the winner in my book. She was so excited that she sounded incoherent. I turned to look at Jaden in surprise. So his girlfriend was a top scriptwriter from Splendor Corp. She was Suzette Johnston, the author of Bewitching Concubine. According to the grapevine, Suzette came from a wealthy family, and she wrote scripts as a hobby. Suzette always kept a low profile and was a mysterious personality. No reporter had managed to photograph her. I remembered that the internet said that she was 28 years old. While it was common for some actresses to conceal their age, her age really did not match how she looked. Suzette came over and stared at me excitedly for a long time. A trace of determination flashed in her eyes. She then removed the fur coat she was wearing and placed it in my hand. This fur coat has been with me for many years. There is only one piece in the world. I'm giving it to you now. She patted me on the shoulder and said, "Continue to work hard. I think you will have a bright future." As I sensed her sincerity, my heart began to feel heavy. She actually liked my performance. She even gave me her treasured fur coat. I lowered my head and clutched the fur coat tightly as if it weighed a ton. I felt embarrassed and remorseful, thinking of how I had bitten Jaden's throat earlier. Unable to tolerate my own behavior, I suddenly looked up and said in a trembling voice, "Do you have 5 minutes? I have something to tell you." Without waiting for anyone to react, I quickly pulled her into the dressing room. I took a deep breath as I closed the door. "I'm sorry." Suzette looked confused. I lowered my eyes and hugged the fur coat in my arms as if I was mustering all my courage. "I didn't want to tell you this. After all, it's so shameful to sleep with someone else's boyfriend. However, I cannot forgive myself." I continued, "I promise you I won't have anything to do with Jaden in the future." After saying that, I closed my eyes. Although I said it with a huge resolution, my heart still sank. Suzette's expression changed. "You can't do that." This time, I was the one who was stunned. I gave her a puzzled look. She was so magnanimous that I could not believe my ears. Suzette pursed her lips, and a trace of hesitation flashed in her eyes. After a while, she continued, "Forget it. I'll be honest with you. We've already decided on Jaden as the male lead all this while. The contract has already been signed. Your performance in the audition this morning was excellent. We should cast you as the female lead if nothing goes wrong. You'll have a lot of scenes together in the future. We'll be filming for 6 months. How can you not have anything to do with him?" I was stunned. It suddenly dawned upon me that if Jaden was not the male lead for Bewitching Concubine, he would be one of the judges for the audition today. Wait a minute. Suzette seemed to suddenly realize something. "From what you said just now, did you think that Jaden is my boyfriend?" I saw the surprise in her eyes and swallowed unconsciously hard. "Isn't he?" "Of course not." She blurted out. "Didn't you read the news on the internet? I made a public announcement on May 20th. Caleb is my boyfriend." After leaving the audition hall, I had the fur coat sent home first, then took a taxi to the street near Splendor Corp. I chose a coffee shop that I usually patronized, ordered an iced black coffee, and sat by the window waiting for someone. When I was in the car, I browsed through Twitter. The person I was waiting for was about 10 minutes away. I took out my phone and habitually turned on the top trending topic. The first one that came to my sight was a topic with the hashtag Eunice. My leg was just broken. and ended with a smile emoji. I frowned and scrolled down further. The second one was with the hashtag Yell releases a new song, and ended with a surprise emoji. Then, the third one was with the hashtag Eunice high amputation, which ended with a candle emoji. My lips twitched, and I immediately figured out my thoughts. It should be that the marketing accounts started to spread rumors to increase popularity when they heard some news. And then Eunice posted a Twitter update to clarify it. When I clicked on the first topic, sure enough, it was Eunice's Twitter post to clarify the news. There were 2 photos attached. The first one showed Eunice's right leg was half hanging and wrapped tightly in plaster. Eunice himself looked at the camera and showed a victory gesture expressionlessly. And the other one, I held my breath slightly, clicked it open, and zoomed the photo in with 2 fingers. Under the light, Jaden sat by the bed and peeled an apple. His slender fingers pressed on the sharp knife while peeling the skin of the apple slowly. His side profile was handsome and well-defined, and his eyelashes cast a faint shadow, which seemed to be secretly photographed by someone else. Eunice posted on Twitter that Jaden had been taking care of him in the hospital since he had a car accident a week ago. Suddenly, all kinds of emotions surged in my heart. It turned out that Jaden did not mean to leave me for another woman that day. It was because of Eunice's accident. Moreover, he did not contact me these past few days. He should be thinking about letting me concentrate on preparing for the audition. My fingers carefully traced Jaden's outline in the photo, and the corner of my lips curled slightly upward, feeling an indescribable sweetness in my heart. Nonetheless, the more I looked at the photo, I suddenly felt something was wrong. I frowned and swapped back and forth between the 2 photos with my finger. A few minutes later, enlightenment struck me. I finally realized what I had ignored. The person who took the photo, she actually turned on beautifying lenses and filters for Jaden. On top of that, she deliberately picked the best angle for Jaden. Even the composition and the light were impeccable. It was not supposed to be anything surprising. However, the photo of Eunice was completely original without any touch-up at all. The answer was apparent. Shiana, who made a call to Jaden, was also in the ward. I bit my lips, trying to relieve the discomfort in my heart, but it did not work. I realized something. No matter what Jaden thought in his heart, Shiana must be crazily in love with Jaden because of the double standard of photoshopping. The earlier scene where the actress said that Shiana was Jaden's junior, and that the 2 had an unusual relationship, appeared in my mind unwittingly. I was nervous for a moment. After trying so hard to restrain myself, I became slightly relaxed. Just as I was about to exit the top trending topic interface and search for Shiana, I inadvertently saw the 9th top trending topic. It came with the hashtag Caleb's photo. The photo was published by the marketing accounts. The boy in the photo seemed to have just participated in the activity. He reached out his hand to wipe the sweat. The boy's fingers were fair, his eyebrows were delicate, and his hair was soaked in sweat. Wisps of hair hung on his forehead, and his red lips were slightly open. His look was captured at that moment. Given how a photo could make its way to the 9th top trending topic, it seemed that Caleb was indeed very popular recently. I clicked into the comments section and was inundated with comments such as, "A beautiful person married to an ugly person. Hello, I'm the deputy director of the Eye Disease Treatment Center who was supposed to see Jaden last time. Everyone looks down on Caleb, yet everyone wants to be Caleb." There were almost no positive comments. Natalie, the beautiful voice of the boy, rang out in her ears. I looked up and saw Caleb sitting opposite me naturally, and a trace of apology flashed in his beautiful eyes. "Sorry to keep you waiting." I was in a trance for a moment. The young man in front of me was as delicate as usual. He was wearing a costly outfit. His behavior and manners exuded pride and confidence. One could not believe that in the past he was just a boy whose mother died early, while his father was paralyzed. Because of this, he needed to work as an assistant while studying. I looked into his eyes and remembered the truth Suzette told me just now. On the 20th of May, Caleb and she were showing off their affection, but Caleb accidentally logged into Jaden's Twitter account, which caused a big misunderstanding, but they immediately clarified it. Thinking of that, I lowered my eyes and said calmly, "It's okay, I just arrived." Caleb raised his eyebrows slightly and said, "Natalie, you asked to see me today. I think it's not something as simple as drinking coffee, right?" I smiled, stirring the coffee in my hand, and did not answer his question. "Does Suzette treat you well?" At the mention of that name, Caleb was suddenly stunned. There were some complicated emotions deep in his eyes. After a while, he lowered his head and said, "Quite good." I asked again, "Do you really like her?" Caleb clenched his fingers and tried to keep a smile on his face. "Natalie, just say it if you have something to say." I stared at his face for a few seconds and said slowly, "You did it on purpose that day, didn't you?" The atmosphere seemed to be completely still. The waiter brought up the coffee ordered by Caleb. I looked at him through the hot steam. The smile on Caleb's face slowly faded. "Natalie, what do you mean?" My gaze remained fixated on him and analyzed according to my own thoughts. "You want to be famous." "No. To be more accurate, you want to be famous overnight." Caleb's expression changed suddenly. "You're Jaden's assistant, and you've been managing his Twitter account. That day, you deliberately logged into his Twitter account while Jaden was filming on the confined set, and sent a picture of Suzette with his account to fake a public announcement. After the whole incident continued to ferment for 3 hours, Jaden happened to finish filming. When he learned that he was forced to make a public announcement, you finally posted a Twitter update to clarify the whole incident." I continued, saying, "Unfortunately, Suzette's identity was exposed at that time, and another wave of popularity was created." "By the way, was that also secretly revealed by you?" Caleb froze suddenly. He held back his emotion and glared at me coldly. His eyes gradually became more and more frigid. I looked straight at him, and my eyes darkened several degrees. "Jaden's assistant, the boyfriend of Splendor Corp's best scriptwriter, was a sugar baby of a rich woman. You became the center of attention with so many mind-blowing gimmicks. With the help of the post on Jaden's Twitter, everyone learned about you in no time." I did not have any extra emotions in my eyes, except for the obvious sarcasm. Every word that came out of my mouth was clear and sharp. "You, Caleb Zenos, have become completely popular." Caleb lowered his eyes slightly without saying anything or retorting. Nonetheless, the veins on the back of his hand were protruding from holding the coffee cup too hard. "But I don't understand." I glanced at his hand, paused, and sighed suddenly. "You are Suzette's boyfriend. She has money and resources. If you want to become a celebrity, why didn't you seek her help instead of taking such extreme means? This would not be good for your future development." "What's wrong with this?" he asked quickly and sneered. "I'm popular anyway, regardless of whether it is negative popularity." My face darkened slightly. I did not agree with his opinion, and I really did not want to argue with him about that. "I talked to Suzette today. She likes you very much." "If T.S." Caleb sneered. He looked up at me and said sarcastically, "She just treats me as a dispensable toy who isn't allowed to show up in public." Hearing Caleb's words, I immediately remembered the scene where Suzette's face turned red, and her eyes lit up at the mention of Caleb. I frowned immediately. Caleb saw that I did not believe it. His eyes darkened, and his hands hanging beside him suddenly clenched into fists. After a long silence, he said slowly, "We met each other through the League of Legends." My heart skipped a beat at his words. He pursed his lips and said, "She is petite, tender, and sweet in the photo, and she has 2 little canine teeth when she smiles, which is completely my ideal type." As he was speaking, Caleb tilted his head and looked at me briefly. After a year of online relationship, we finally decided to meet up. I looked at him with complicated emotions in my eyes, as if I could predict what would happen next. The moment I knew the truth, I almost broke down. I didn't expect her photoshopping skills to be so good. I opened my mouth and did not know what to say. I could only sigh silently. "But..." Caleb clenched his fists tightly, and the emotions in his eyes changed the moment I rushed out of the place. "She grabbed me." I remembered Suzette's strong physique and squeezed out a sentence with difficulty. "Did she force herself on you?" Caleb shook his head with deep and obscure emotions in his eyes. A moment later, he raised his head and looked at me with gleaming eyes. A sentence came out from his thin lips. "She gave me a fur coat." I was confused upon hearing that. He added, "She also told me that that is the only fur coat in the world that has accompanied her for many years." I was rendered speechless. Caleb's clear voice was slightly hoarse at that moment. "Who can refuse the temptation of a fur coat?" I was stunned. Later, I learned that she didn't lie to me. It was really her in that photo. But it was her in the past. Caleb suddenly pursed his thin lips and breathed heavily. "She was ill and took a lot of hormonal drugs, and the side effects caused her obesity. She was only 28 years old, but she looked like a person in her 40s or 50s. I widened my eyes. Suzette was only 28 years old. She was very nice to me after we got together. That time, my dad was attacked by sudden asthma, and I was not at home. If she hadn't come in time and sent my dad to the hospital, I would have lost my only family in the world. Caleb closed his eyes and said, I thought we would stay like this forever until I saw it with my own eyes later. My heart skipped a beat. I wondered if Suzette cheated on him. Caleb's face was as sullen as calm water, and his eyes were red. He said in a hoarse voice, she actually gifted a fur coat to another man. I was dumbfounded. My head was buzzing, and I felt that the whole world became unreal. Suddenly, my brain connected everything quickly. I had a sense of speculation and asked with trembling teeth, is that man Jaden? Caleb was stunned. His jawline seemed to have gradually tightened, and his breathing also paused occasionally. After a long time, he nodded in sorrow. A year ago, during the audition of the leading actor for Bewitching Concubine, she looked at Jaden with a burning desire. Her desire was so strong that I was afraid she would leave me in the next second and throw herself into the arms of Jaden, who was more outstanding than me in every aspect. I thought he had overthought. He lowered his head and said in a low voice, fortunately, Jaden didn't accept her fur coat at that time. I lowered my head silently. Fortunately, I did not bring the fur coat over. I didn't know until then that everything about her was a lie. I'm not the only one she loves, just like she doesn't only have one fur coat. He continued, you know what? Caleb's thin lips were pursed as thin as a thread, and a trace of tiredness crept onto his eyes. She opened a fur coat factory. I was absolutely stunned after listening to his words. To her, I'm afraid there's no difference between me and those fur coats in her factory. I held the coffee spoon in a daze, opened my mouth slightly, and did not close it for a long time. He actually compared himself to a fur coat. Caleb's lips trembled slightly, and his voice was extremely hoarse. So I began to plan for myself and schemed this public announcement. If I were abandoned one day, I wouldn't have to go back to those days when I had nothing. As soon as he finished speaking, a suppressed silence pervaded the air around us. I did not know how long had passed. Looking at the gloomy and sad look on Caleb's face, I said slowly, I'm not a very smart person. Caleb was stunned and looked at me for a moment. What? Suzette might have thought of the things I can think of. He was apparently stunned by the way he gazed at me. I sighed, took my bag, and got up slowly. After taking a few steps, I turned around. She knew it was you who used her with this public announcement, but she didn't expose it. Think about the meaning behind it yourself. With that said, I turned around. When I arrived at the door, Caleb's voice came from behind. Natalie, don't you want to know why Jaden has been so cold to you throughout the year? After talking with Caleb, it was already dark. I took a taxi directly to the hospital where Eunice stayed. I tentatively sent Eunice a WhatsApp message just now. Is Shiana with you now? Eunice quickly replied, yes. Are you looking for her? I looked at the line and sneered. Of course. I had something for her. I had never thought about it. The reason why Jaden avoided me that whole year was actually related to Shiana, whom I had never met before and had not been arranged to appear until chapter 12. I clenched my phone tightly and walked into the hallway of the hospital with extreme anger. The hospital was extremely quiet that day, but when I walked to the corner of the aisle, I bumped into a person carelessly. Watch out! As my body unexpectedly fell backward, someone held my waist firmly and locked me in his arms. The familiar breath instantly shrouded me. I looked up. It was Jaden. Looking at his cold and handsome face, my anger subsided. I blinked and asked, the audition is over? Jaden stared at me with his dark eyes and hummed softly in response. Just when I was about to say something, Jaden leaned over and hugged me. His face was buried in my shoulder, and his voice was slightly hoarse. I'm so tired. As he spoke, the warm and damp breath he poured on my neck slowly penetrated my skin and quietly spread along my sensitive nerves. I was suddenly short of breath and pushed him. Someone is here. He did not move, and his low voice was a little lazy. Make it public if our photo is taken. I was stunned that time around. You said we needed to be careful last time and not get caught by the paparazzi. My words paused abruptly as I realized that he used the word public. My breathing stopped. I take back what I said last time. Jaden's voice suddenly became a little dull. He kept a slight distance from me, but his eyes fixed on me as he asked seriously, can you pretend that you didn't hear anything? When I looked at him, I suddenly wanted to laugh. And then I really chuckled. He listened to my laughter, and there was some doubt in his eyes. After thinking for a while, he cupped one side of my cheeks with his palm, rubbed it, and said gently, "Natalie, let's announce our relationship publicly." My eyelashes suddenly fluttered, and my heart was racing extremely fast. For some reason, I felt that he was a little different now. "Did Quaid say something to you after I left?" He shook his head. He didn't say anything. I stared at him suspiciously. Jaden looked at me intently, which made me feel a little uneasy. However, he suddenly sighed. "I'm just a little scared." "What are you afraid of?" I raised my face and met his eyes, asking him. He paused, and his gaze darkened. Then, he pinched my cheek and whispered, "You already know." Before I could retort, he said again slowly, "Quaid is back again." I frowned slightly and did not understand what he meant by again in his words. "I told myself that you wanted to play a role in Bewitching Concubine because it is a good script, not because the director is Quaid. It's why I encouraged you to go for the audition. But I'm still scared." He pursed his thin lips tightly. "I'm scared that you approached me deliberately, as you did a year ago, just to use me to provoke him. I'm scared that you're not even." I interrupted him. "I did not." He was stunned. I looked straight into his eyes and felt a sullen sensation rushing within my body. "Nothing happened a year ago, and nothing happens now. I've never thought of you as a substitute for anyone." His pupils suddenly contracted, as if he could not believe what he heard. I took a deep breath and enunciated my words clearly. "You're the one I've always liked." He opened his thin lips slightly and was in a trance for a moment. When he came back to his senses, he stared at me with his dark eyes. They were so dark that they could blend in with the night outside. He murmured, "But at that time the video Shiana showed you is fake. The woman in it is not me at all." My teeth creaked, and my hand turned slightly red from clutching my phone with too much force. In the photo album on my phone, there was a video that Caleb had just sent to me. In the video, the woman was dressed in a bareback red dress with long curly black hair and fair skin. She seemed to be talking to another person. Her voice was calm and extremely cold. "Like him? What a joke. How could I really like Jaden? It is only because Quaid is back, and he has hurt me so deeply. I just want to use Jaden to provoke him. That's all." After saying that, she smiled slightly, revealing the same side profile as me. "Caleb told me a year ago, when Shiana came to Jaden with that video, Caleb clearly saw Shiana sneering in a corner when no one noticed it. However, Jaden was so devastated that he did not notice it. He wanted to remind Jaden, but at the thought that Suzette almost gave the latter a fur coat, he did not want to say anything anymore." I looked up at Jaden, and the flame of anger lit up in my eyes. "A year ago, I had no idea that Quaid came back to secretly choose the leading actor for Bewitching Concubine. How could I say something like that?" Jaden's body stiffened. "You didn't know?" I nodded hurriedly in response. He was stunned, his eyes darkened, and his voice was extremely low and hoarse. "Didn't he come to you?" Without any hesitation, I replied, "Of course. He didn't have the audacity to see me." Jaden looked at me. He nodded slightly as if he had thought of something. "He really doesn't have the nerve to see you after you exposed that incident." Hearing that, I was stunned. Sure enough, he knew what happened 5 years ago. In other words, he had been observing me secretly. Suddenly, the last sentence Caleb said to me flashed in my mind. "Natalie, Jaden has liked you for many years." I looked up at him, and my heart trembled. A wave of complicated emotions surged up within me and spread through my heart silently. I opened my mouth a few times but did not say a word. After a while, I lowered my eyes slightly. My face was burning, and I spoke in a hoarse voice. "Shall we go home?" "Huh?" He leaned over slightly, and his voice was low and hoarse. I raised my head, stared at his handsome and well-defined face, and licked my lips. "I have a script that I want to discuss with you." "Of course." "It's a real discussion about the script." When the door was snapped closed, I reached out and put my arms around Jaden's neck, pulling his head down. My eyes were foggy, and my voice was soft. Jaden raised his eyebrows slightly. At that time, a few buttons of his collar were unbuttoned, revealing a large area of his collarbone and chest. My gaze fixated on him, and I could feel my face burning. Even the place that my fingers touched was burning. He chuckled in a low voice. "Okay, let's discuss the script then." It's not as soon as I spoke. Jaden stepped forward, pressed me against the wall, locked my chin abruptly, lowered his head, and started kissing me. My whole body trembled, and I tiptoed to kiss him back. A moment later, his lips pressed against mine while rubbing them softly. His voice was hoarse. Yahir looked at Wenna. She exposes all the scars in front of him, and her watery eyes are covered with a mist of humiliation. His first reaction is not to wipe her tears away, but to kiss her. Jaden sealed my lips again. Possess her! He picked me up horizontally and took me to the bed. And then his body got on top of mine. Just like this. Jaden gnawed at my chin gently. Like this. He went further down and kissed my collarbone passionately. I looked up at him, and the mist in my eyes became thicker. My body trembled violently. He gulped, and his fingertips lifted my shoulder straps with extreme restraint. His slightly cold hand slipped down, and his breath was vague and hoarse. And like this, too. I did not expect it. Jaden really discussed the script with me all night. The discussion made my voice hoarse. The next day, as soon as I woke up consciously, I saw that Jaden was wearing a shirt. His physique was well built, with muscles covering his slender body evenly. He looked lean in his outfit, yet he could flash his figure without an outfit too. I licked my lips, and my eyes were burning with desire. The next second, a familiar breath engulfed me. A kiss fell between my eyebrows gently. The crew of Bewitching Concubine is expected to officially start in a month. It's a film mainly focused on the female lead. You will be exhausted at that time. Have a good rest the next few days, and I will take care of other things. I was stunned for a second and then asked happily, did they confirm me as the leading actress? Jaden curled his thin lips upward with amusement overflowing in his eyes as he said, Natalie, we shall have another good time working together. I looked at him, and my red lips curled upward. I wrapped my arms around his neck and jumped on him directly. That month, I did not have a good rest. As Jaden told me, do not ask why. The Bewitching Concubine was about to start filming. As the leading actor and leading actress, we should concentrate on discussing the script. There was one time when I mentioned to Jaden that I had misunderstood him and Suzette, and I was so ashamed that I buried myself in the quilt. Hearing that, Jaden was slightly stunned. He pulled me out of the quilt with a red face. His beautiful eyebrows knitted tightly and stared at me with his deep eyes. Didn't you see any of the text messages I sent you? My eyes widened, and my heartbeat went faster, uncontrollably. What text message? I blocked his number on WhatsApp and Twitter that day, but his phone number was not blacklisted. However, I threw the card away directly. Even if I restored it now, I was afraid I could not find those text messages I received before. I threw the card away that day. What did you send me? I was curious. Jaden avoided my gaze and got up abruptly. He said in a low voice, I'm going to take a shower in the bathroom. I wanted to stop him, but he walked fast. Before he left, he seemed to take a look at his phone. I blinked and immediately understood his hint. I could not read what he sent to me, but I couldn't read from the sender's phone. My heart beat fast, as if it was going to jump out of my chest. I picked up his phone and accidentally touched the fingerprint. The phone was unlocked immediately. I was stunned and looked in the direction of the bathroom door, wondering when Jaden saved my fingerprints into his phone. Although I felt that respecting the privacy of each other was a common understanding for a couple, a faint smile still crept onto my face. My heart seemed to be wrapped in layers of joy. He knew how to make me smile. I loved him so much. Then, I clicked open the text message and found the messages he sent. Jaden hardly sent any text messages, except for a few working replies. The rest of the messages were all sent to me. I found those sent on the 20th of May. Natalie, I was filming just now. I didn't send that Twitter post. Soon, another message was sent. I've asked Caleb to clarify it. After that, he would send me a text message every day, but it was always a short sentence. Where are you? Finally, it was the latest one. Jaden seemed to be drunk or something, and he sent it without correcting the typo. Natalie, I like ya so much. I looked at the word like ya in a daze, and my fingers and heart trembled uncontrollably. Eunice said that Jaden never drank alcohol. I wondered if he was drunk because he could not find me, or he wanted to act cute after being serious for a long time. Some strange scenes flashed across my mind. I shook my head quickly, thinking that the idea of Jaden being drunk was more logical. The day before the filming, Quaid suddenly came to me, and Jaden happened to go out to buy me oatmeal. When Quaid saw the man's slippers placed in front of my house, His expression stiffened slightly. Did you two live together? I did not deny it. I leaned against the door lazily and did not intend to let him enter the house. What can I do for you? He fixed his gaze on my face and made a difficult sound in his throat. If stop. I raised my eyebrows and said, let's not talk about the past few years. When you pursued me back then, I never wanted to be with you. Why? I straightened my back, and the corners of my lips were slightly raised. There was no sarcasm. I just stated the facts calmly. You are a scumbag. He pursed his thin lips tightly and was about to say something when I continued to speak in a cold voice. After winning the Best Director award 5 years ago, you wanted to take advantage of the opportunity and make another movie with the same theme. But you couldn't get any investment because everyone was waiting. Only one person reached out to help you, with a condition that you would get together with his daughter, who admired you for a long time. I continued. You were pursuing me while being together with her. Tell me if you were a jerk. What's more ridiculous is that you thought you were hiding it well from the 2 women you were dealing with. I paused and suddenly raised my chin to look at him. Do you want to guess who told me the number of your hotel room? Quaid stood still. His pupils narrowed, and his body stiffened. I glanced at the time and thought Jaden was about to come back. I said to Quaid, who was stunned, okay. Let bygones be bygones. The Bewitching Concubine is going to start filming tomorrow. Mr. Campbell, aren't you busy? I wanted him to leave right away if he was busy. Quaid was stunned for a while before he came back to his senses. He pursed his lips again when he heard my words and hesitated to say, I have some bad news to tell you. I gasped and asked, what bad news? The investor wants to change the lead actress. Quaid lowered his eyes slightly. At that moment, I had a name in my mind, but I still asked, who is replacing me? Quaid looked at me with complicated emotions in his eyes and replied slowly, Shiana. Again, it was Shiana. It seemed that I had not heard the name for a long time since I was with Jaden. Then, I opened the top trending topic. The first post was Quaid announced the change of the lead actress of The Bewitching Concubine. The second post was how incredible Gianna's resources are. The third post was Yell talked about his feelings of not being popular. My eyes flickered slightly. In fact, after the last incident, I was going to question Shiana directly. But Jaden told me something that shocked me. Shiana was Eunice's wife. What are you thinking about? A cold and low voice sounded in my ears. My thoughts were suddenly interrupted, and I replied casually, I'm thinking about Eunice. Before I could finish my words, his breath engulfed me, and he wrapped my waist with his long arms to let me sit on his lap. Jaden's eyes were filled with impending danger. Eunice? I gulped and subconsciously completed the last words of the sentence. His wife. Jaden's eyes relaxed as if he had thought of something. He looked down at me and asked, what's wrong with Shiana? I looked at him and said through gritted teeth, she stole my role in Bewitching Concubine. She wanted to work with you. Hearing that, Jaden frowned. He lowered his eyes and thought for a long time before saying, maybe she'll give it up soon. I was confused. What do you mean? Maybe Jaden himself felt that there was no logic in his words. He pursed his thin lips and decided to start telling from the beginning. Eunice and Shiana have been a couple since they were at the university. They were both good-looking and were a perfect match together. They got married right after graduation and had been together for 6 years. Nonetheless, they did not disclose it to the media. I forgot to mention that Shiana was the eldest daughter of the owner of Splendor Corp. It was just a matter of words if she wanted to play the role in Bewitching Concubine. A few years ago, Shiana had a car accident, which seemed to hurt her brain. She kept talking nonsense all day, such as the leading actor and the supporting actress. When she woke up, her taste seemed to have changed. She had never used perfume before, but now she liked it very much, especially the jasmine-scented perfume. It was worth mentioning that her eyes lit up when she saw Jaden, and she was more enthusiastic about Jaden than Eunice. In recent months, Gianna's condition seemed to be getting worse. The day before, she came to Jaden and said something ambiguous. The next day, she turned around and forgot what she said. Eunice, as her husband, was scared and worried about Shiana every day. He was almost depressed because of it. Over time, he had developed that strange hobby. After listening to it, I fell into deep thought. Jaden's hand around my waist tightened, and he repeated it with his forehead pressing against mine. Who knows that Shiana will suddenly... The phone vibrated. I did not bother to move. I signaled Jaden with my eyes. Then, Jaden let go of one of his hands and went to get the phone on the table. His eyes darkened when he saw the caller on the screen. Without saying anything, he put the phone next to my ear. Quaid's voice on the phone sounded stiff, and he seemed to restrain it as much as he could. Natalie. The investor withdrew his decision to change the lead actress. After saying that, he could not help but curse. Damn it. He is fooling around with me, isn't he? When the filming of Bewitching Concubine was coming to an end, Eunice called and said that Shiana had a car accident again. She seemed to have hurt her head again. Fortunately, she seemed to be back to normal this time. When I heard the news, I had just finished taking a shower and was sitting cross-legged on the hotel bed while watching TV. Jaden sat next to me and dried my hair with a towel. I did not ignore Eunice's choking voice on the phone just now. I sighed. Over the past few years, Eunice must be sad to see Shiana become like this. Jaden's hands, which were helping me dry my hair, paused. He bent down, held my head, and fixed his gaze on me. Natalie. Next year on the 20th of May during the premiere of Bewitching Concubine, let's announce our relationship publicly. He was very close to me, and his voice was magnetic and low. His posture at that moment was like a silent bewitchment. That was the second time he asked me to make a public announcement about our relationship. I looked at him quietly. After a while, I raised my chin slightly and pouted my red lips. Okay. In an instant, Jaden's eyes seemed to become extremely dark in silence. He threw away the towel, lowered his head, and kissed my lips. Then, he pressed me on the bed and said, "Your hair is dry." I responded passionately to his kiss and said in a hoarse and vague voice, "The TV is still on." Jaden kissed me around my neck and replied, "It's okay." But my unfinished words were blocked in my mouth by a hot kiss, and I could not say another word. There was a singing talent show playing on the TV at that moment. The famous singer, Yell, was one of the mentors. Yell asked a boy in an ordinary outfit, "What is your dream?" The boy burst into tears. "My family has been having difficulties since I was a child. My mom told me that a child from a poor family should learn to earn money early. My dream is to be a singer." After the boy finished speaking, every mentor was moved and started shedding tears. Just then, the boy changed the topic. "So, Yell, what is your dream?" Yell was stunned. He closed his eyes and shed a tear in the corner of his eyes. "Next year on the 20th of May, when I release a new album, I want to be the top trending topic." Bloopers. When the time came, Yell's dream did not come true. The 20th of May was such a beautiful and romantic day. The topic with the hashtag Jaden and Natalie announced their relationship publicly appeared as the top trending topic, with the bright red word popular next to it. At 1:14 p.m., Jaden retweeted my confessional Twitter post from 2 years ago. "Sooner or later, Jaden will belong to me." Jaden retweeted and mentioned me 3 times. Yuma. Author. Fei Cheng Sheng Shui Zhao won on the day I drafted the divorce agreement. Zachary J became famous overnight. He topped the Twitter trending list, and photos of him flooded the screen on Instagram. Without glancing at the divorce agreement, Zachary rolled up the agreement sheets and gave me a soft knock on the head. "Ava Jones, you're really silly." His eyes were slightly bloodshot because of the all-night program recording. "What? I'm just afraid that as a married man, your career in showbiz will be affected." I rubbed my head helplessly. "I'm a songwriter, not a prostitute." Zachary threw his coat on the couch and said, "I'm fine with it if you want a divorce, but I'm afraid you'll be in trouble when someone finds it out." Zachary's words reminded me that it was not a good choice to put myself in the eye of the storm by divorcing at this juncture, but it was not appropriate for me to be with Zachary. Zachary's mother had been diagnosed with terminal cancer some time ago, and her only wish was to see Zachary get married before she died. The J and Jones families used to live opposite each other, and I used to sit next to Zachary at high school, and thus I was very familiar with him. But we didn't like each other and argued all the time. We often got punished by teachers for quarrels during class. It was even weirder that our class teacher suspected we were in a relationship, so she consulted our parents about how we behaved. The teacher told them about our puppy love and minor spats. He suggested the parents communicate with us to help us solve problems with each other so that we could behave better in class and have a better relationship. Zachary's mother said, "There's no such need. They will be fine. Ava is a good girl. and I'll be happy if she becomes my daughter-in-law." The teacher then awkwardly turned to my dad. "Mr. Jones." But my dad just smiled. "I believe in Zachary. He can handle it. I'll tell Ava not to stir up trouble in class anymore." Our teacher was speechless. Some of our classmates heard their conversation and spread it throughout the class. Zachary had just returned from basketball training when he heard it. Wet hair sticking to his forehead with his eyebrows revealed. He pulled up his top to wipe the sweat off his face. Tiny beads of sweat slid down his Adam's apple, soaking his collar. His tall figure in front of the table emanated manly charm. I looked up at him as he said with a faint smile, "Ava, an arranged marriage is not feasible." I rolled my eyes and threw my notebook at his face. "Don't worry. I'll marry anyone except you." 5 months ago. It rained heavily that day. Zachary appeared with his eyes red at the door of my house. Drenched, he panted, "Hello! Do you know who I am? Marry me." I looked at him blankly, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, he grabbed my wrist and pulled me out. "It's urgent. I'll tell you later." Before he could finish his words, the door was closed by him. In the car, Zachary told me everything from beginning to end. And then we became a temporary couple. But Zachary's mom was not stupid. She asked us to get our marriage certificate the next day. My parents had liked Zachary for a long time, so they approved of our marriage immediately. Zachary became despondent since his mother had passed away. Before his mother's death, he could stay in his studio all day, but he had never stepped into it in the past 2 months. Coincidentally, Charles Wells, Zachary's college classmate and also the director of a talent show, couldn't afford enough judges for the show due to insufficient funds, so he contacted Zachary. At first, Zachary refused to appear on the show because he was just a behind-the-scenes songwriter. He finally agreed after continuous gentle persuasion from Charles and me. However, he was henceforth trapped in the biz. I should have left Zachary's house after his mother's funeral, but he was in low spirits. I feared he would do something stupid, so I had to stay with him. Fortunately, after he was hired as the show's judge, he became active in his work again, so it was time for me to leave. Just as I was about to leave his house with my suitcase, my phone rang. It was from Zachary. "Ava, I need you to pick me up at the TV station." "But now shouldn't you be responsible for me? It was you who persuaded me to be here." His voice was hoarse, which was different from usual. I suddenly felt uneasy. "Okay, I'll be right there. Send me the detailed address." Unexpectedly, Zachary's address was not the TV station but the hotel next to it. He was waiting for me in the hotel's underground parking lot. He pulled his black cap very low over his face, but I could still recognize him at a glance by his sharp jawline. "Zach." I waved at him. He quickly walked toward me, then pressed all his weight on me as if he was about to collapse. I could feel his hot body temperature even through my sweater. "Have you got a fever?" I helped him into the car with great difficulty and then reached out to feel his forehead. It was terribly hot. He looked blank with his cheeks red. "Let me take you to the hospital." I bent down to fasten his seat belt. He refused as his slightly hot breath brushed past my ear and messed up my hair, making me itch. "No. Let's go home." "But you're burning up." I turned around and found that we were so close to each other, so I leaned back a little. He suddenly held the back of my head as his lips fell toward mine. He loosened his grip when the distance between our lips was not more than an iota. The veins on his neck bulged, telling me he was suffering. "I don't have a fever. Let's just go home." He pushed me away and closed the car door. I spread out my hands and saw my palms covered in sweat. Not a fever? So what was it? When we got home, I opened the car door and saw that Zachary's face and neck had turned scarlet. I had barely helped him into the house when he shook me off and tottered to the bathroom in the master bedroom. I looked at his wobbly body and quickly followed him. "Zach, do you need help?" Caught off guard, I was pulled into his arms and bumped into his sturdy chest. Then, my chin was clasped as his soft lips fell on mine, sweeping away the oxygen bit by bit like a hurricane. My mind went blank as if fireworks were blooming in my brain. He finally let go of me. His eyes were red and his grip on my shoulders tightened before loosening. His heavy breathing pounded on my heart, overwhelming me. He laughed at himself and said, "How can you help me?" Before I could react, the bathroom door was closed and locked. It sounded chaotic inside. I could do nothing but listen nervously outside the bathroom. Later, there was the sound of running water. It was so long that I couldn't help knocking on the door. "Zach, Are you okay? A tall figure suddenly appeared at the door, scaring me so much that I took 2 steps back. Zachary came out of the bathroom wrapped in a bath towel. His hair dripped with water. His eyes were still red and his face and lips had lost color. He avoided me and walked straight to the bed. He closed his eyes and fell heavily onto the bed. Zach, your hair is still wet. You'll get a headache. I hurriedly walked over and pulled him up. He opened his eyes and glimpsed at me, then silently fell back to the bed. I sighed and said, "Get up, let me dry your hair." Zachary turned his gaze at me. "The hairdryer is in the bathroom." "I know." I took out a set of clean pajamas from the closet and threw them to him. "Put them on quickly, or you might catch a cold." Zachary slightly raised his eyebrows. "I still need underpants." I almost slipped over when I heard this. I gritted my teeth and returned to the closet to take his underwear. "Don't argue with a drunk man. Calm down," I spoke to myself. I reached into the closet and threw a random pair of underpants at his face. He caught it smoothly, but when our eyes met, he collapsed on the bed weakly. Droplets of water slid down from his wet hair and damped his eyes. He looked so innocent with his watery eyes. My mouth twitched with amusement. This man could be a talented actor if he wanted. "Tell me when you're done." I looked away helplessly. I waited for Zach to get dressed outside the bathroom, but suddenly, there was a dull thud from inside. I hurriedly pushed the door open and found him sitting half naked on the floor. "Are you all right?" I asked worriedly. Then I was shocked when I felt the heat of his arm. "Don't try to feel me up." He lazily raised his eyes and fixed them on me. Then, he slowly held my hand. Before I could react, my hand appeared on his well-defined abs. My hand gradually heated up as I felt his burning body. I withdrew my hand awkwardly, helped him to the bed, and wiped his hair with a dry towel. As for Zachary, he kept his eyes closed with a look of despair on his face. My fingertips passed through his soft hair when the hot wind from the hairdryer blew. Drying his hair was so dull that my gaze wandered aimlessly, gradually shifting from Zachary's head to his face. It was true that he was indeed a handsome man when he shut his mouth. "Ava, are you taking revenge on me?" I suddenly heard Zachary's faint voice through the noise of the hairdryer. And only then did I realize that I had been so focused on his face that I had forgotten to move the hairdryer. The back of my hand and that patch of his hair had become terribly hot. Zachary's ears even turned red because of the heat. For Zachary had a high fever all night and was almost unconscious on the bed. I had to stay up to look after him for the whole night. My baggage also stayed at the door for the entire night. When it was nearly dawn, Zachary's temperature finally returned to normal. I took my hand back from his forehead and heaved a sigh of relief. I stretched myself and was ready to prepare his breakfast. I had just started when the doorbell rang. As soon as I opened the door, Charles appeared with a pile of gifts in front of me. "Mrs. J, is Zach all right?" I closed the door with a cold face. He hurriedly put down the gifts and held the edge of the door. "Mrs. J, it's not my fault. I didn't know Amanda Lewis had put some aphrodisiacs in the wine. If I had known, I wouldn't have handed the wine to Zach." Charles was so strong that I couldn't stop him from stepping inside. As soon as he entered, he saw my baggage and knelt before me with a thud. "Mrs. J, Zach did nothing wrong. Don't send him packing. Amanda's to blame. Zach truly respects you. I swear that he never looked at any woman at the recording site. He was either sleeping with sunglasses or writing songs in the dressing room." Charles' words amused me. I didn't expect Zachary to be so ascetic. "Honey, look. He made me almost break my loyalty to you. You made me kneel for 2 hours yesterday. Please don't be angry anymore, okay?" Before I let out a giggle at Charles' words, the voice of Zachary came from behind. Seeing the look of despair on Charles' face, I rubbed my forehead helplessly. I had to admit that Zachary was quite talented at acting. "Who was torturing me all night yesterday?" I couldn't help but blurt. Charles' face relaxed at once, and he began to watch the show of us. So Zach didn't lose his loyalty. "Mrs. J, thank you for your meticulous care of Zach. The dark circles under your eyes tell me how intense last night was. Have a good rest. Ha ha ha. I won't disturb you two anymore. Ha ha ha." Damn it. It was true that out of the mouth comes evil. I nudged Zachary behind me, and he slowly called out to Charles. "Wait a minute." Just as I was hoping that he would explain to Charles for me, he said to Charles, "Kneel, and you are not allowed to leave in less than 2 hours." I saw his lips curved in a slight smile while he faked a pitiful tone as he spoke. Honey, go and rest. I'll take care of everything, and the breakfast is almost ready. 5. Stop acting. I gritted my teeth and whispered to Zachary. His big hands landed on my shoulders, and the warmth of his palms passed through my clothes. Ouch! After a busy night, my shoulders were sore and tired. I was so shocked at the sudden massage by Zachary that I exclaimed, but it had to be said that he was really skilled with the perfect strength. Honey, you've worked hard all night. He bent down as his eyes glittered with slyness. Seeing this, Charles immediately stood up and apologized. I'm sorry, I will never be a third wheel. I'm leaving now. At this time, I received a WhatsApp message from my best friend living abroad, Zoe Kitts. I clicked on it and found a photo of my ex-boyfriend, Timothy Chase, and an advertising poster for an international luxury brand. Zoe also sent me a voice message at the same time. I clicked on it but failed to adjust my phone's volume in time. Ava, I didn't know until now that Timothy has become a superstar. My God, you can boast that you had a romance with a celebrity. Zoe's voice of shock echoed in the living room. I looked up awkwardly, only to meet Zachary's dead eyes. The warmth on my shoulder disappeared, and a hand reached out from behind to take away my phone. Timothy was also a judge on this talent show, but unlike Zachary, he was hired by the program crew with a lot of money as a superstar. Mrs. J, you've been in a relationship with Timothy Chase? Charles returned when he heard what Zoe said, and he continued. He is a well-known gigolo in the biz. Amanda Lewis is his agent. I felt like my phone was about to be crushed by Zachary, but Charles was still inflaming his passions. Charles looked at me and then glanced at Zachary, saying, Zach, don't you know about their story? I scowled at Charles, and he shut up at once. The next moment, I was held up in the air, freaked out. I held on tight to Zachary. What are you doing? I only realized then that Zachary had scooped me up by the waist. I have some family matters to deal with, so please leave. Zachary didn't respond to me but told Charles to leave. Then he carried me to the bedroom. With the sound of the door closing, I sank into the soft mattress. Zachary stood by the bed and looked down at me. Did you really have a romance with him? His sudden temper stunned me, and I replied weakly, yes, but for only 3 days. I first fell for his pretty face, but after we got together, I felt we were not a match, so I broke up with him. Hey, Zach, do you think you are my real husband? I picked up the pillow next to me and threw it at him, but he didn't dodge it and could no longer hold back his laughter. Zach, you're talented. You can change your job and be an actor. I'm just afraid that your parents will worry about you if someone breaks your heart, he said seriously without batting an eye. But you're not a rich woman, so Timothy should be the one to feel sad. Get lost. I was infuriated by him. I should have left you alone and not cared about you even though your temperature skyrocketed yesterday. I was so angry that I spoke incoherently. As for the culprit in my rage, Zachary just crossed his arms in front of his chest as if he was watching a good show. No, I paused momentarily and said with a smile, looking after you all night was my duty. I'll take it as a payment by labor for a prostitute. I deliberately emphasized the last word. The smile on Zachary's lips gradually froze. Ava, he called out my name expressionlessly. I quickly got out of bed and ran out. As I ran, I said, Mr. Prostitute, don't worry, I know you're weary. Let me get you some nourishing breakfast. Zach, be gentle. My shoulders. Zach, I was wrong. Mr. J, my handsome music producer, please let me off. Boo-hoo. After graduation, I opened a fashion design studio with my college classmate Bob Lennon. Over these years, our business was booming. Many B-list and C-list stars frequented our studio. 2 months ago, we were hired as the stylists for the contestants of Charles' talent show. It was actually thanks to Zachary. Bob knew about my 3-day relationship with Timothy, so he only arranged for himself and 2 assistants to take charge of the work. However, one of the assistants asked for leave today. I was slightly scared that the pain Zachary had suffered last time would happen again, so I told Bob that I would temporarily take over the assistant's work. Bob was dumbfounded when he heard that. He even reached out to touch my forehead and asked in surprise, Ava, are you okay? You would turn around and leave when you saw him from afar since you broke up with him in college. What's wrong with you today? I patted his hand and said, it's been so many years. He's the one who should be avoiding me. Besides, Will you be able to finish your work today without me? Bob rolled his eyes at me. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I was worried that you would feel sad when you saw Timothy. So I kept you away from this work. I've been so busy at the TV station working without you every week. I'm here now. Since there was no elimination yet, there were a lot of contestants. As soon as we arrived, we started working non-stop. Miss, can I add you on WhatsApp? I want you to design my style in the future. I turned my head and saw a contestant standing next to me. Just add me. She's a newlywed and doesn't have much time to deal with the studio's affairs. Bob stood between the contestant and me and showed his QR code. Ava, you got married. When did this happen? The assistant, named John, turned to me in surprise. My smile froze in my mouth, and I glared at Bob with a murderous look. Now the whole studio knew. Bob ignored my gaze and turned around to gossip with John. She just didn't want us to know. If I hadn't accidentally seen her personal information form that day, I wouldn't have known that she filled out the spouse column. Bob, stop. If he continued, I would be exposed. Bob patted me on the shoulder and pretended to comfort me, saying, "It's just the same name as our music producer Zachary J. What's to be ashamed of? So many people share the exact same name throughout the country." Hearing Bob's words, everyone in the dressing room rushed over. Ava, do you often compare your husband with our judge? They're both called Zachary J, but the gap between them is enormous. Tell me about it. If it were me, I would be too embarrassed to tell others that my husband's name is Zachary J. I gave several awkward laughs to cover up my uneasiness. Yes, my husband is mediocre. He's not as stunning and calm as Mr. J. He's so mean that I want to poison him. This thought has become stronger since I met Mr. J. Before I could finish my sentence, the dressing room was already filled with laughter. Bob couldn't help but say with a sigh, I suddenly feel that my wife's name is not that bad. 7. The contestants' clothes and makeup had all been set, and thus I finally had a moment of leisure before the show's recording. While I was wandering around, someone grabbed my arm. With the sound of the door closing, I bumped into someone's embrace. I looked up and found that it was Zachary. He was wearing black sunglasses with his lips slightly pursed. I could not tell his emotions. Looking down, I noticed that the makeup on my face was printed on his white shirt. Damn! It seemed the new setting spray didn't work. Zachary, do you know how many brain cells of mine you've just killed by scaring me? I scolded him boldly since it was he who scared me first. He tapped my forehead and said, "It's not like you had many to begin with. Besides, who's the one speaking ill of me everywhere? Who talks trash all day long?" His tall figure blocking the light above my head was intimidating. What? I pushed him away. It's a fake marriage. The fewer people who know about it, the better. I have to find some excuses. The recording will start soon. Deal with your clothes first. I pointed to the stain on his clothes. Zachary took off his sunglasses and glimpsed at the stain. He lazily raised his eyes and said, "I've only taken this shirt today." I sighed helplessly. This man must do it on purpose. It was fine to ask the crew for a new shirt, but if others saw the makeup printed on the clothes, things would become complicated. Take off your shirt. I'll use the makeup remover and dry it. I should be able to make it. Zachary put his hands in his pockets and remained unmoved. I curled my lips and reached out to unbutton his shirt. The door was pushed open when I had just taken off his shirt. I was so frightened that I hurriedly covered my head with the shirt. Zach. Hearing that it was Charles, I took the clothes away and looked at him in dismay. The second half of his sentence seemed stuck in his throat, and his eyes changed strangely. Zach, the recording is just half an hour away. Can you finish it before that? I immediately understood what Charles meant. I casually replied, "Don't worry, he can only last for about 5 minutes." Charles' jaw dropped in shock. He patted Zachary earnestly and said, "Zach, don't give up. It's all about technique." Charles ran outside and closed the door, but I was already laughing so hard that I collapsed on the sofa. Don't give up. Suddenly, some pornographic sounds came from the opposite side of the wall. I instantly realized that it seemed to be Timothy's dressing room. Zachary had already put on his headphones and mouthed "have fun" to me. I was surrounded by the crazy pants next door, coming one after another as if I was in a Dolby Atmos movie hall. I was so ashamed that I couldn't help scratching the floor with my toes. Next to me, Zachary looked as if he was used to it. Whether I said, "Sorry, I'll tell Charles that you can do it for 2 hours," or "You're much better than the guy next door," Zachary remained indifferent and refused to lend me the headphones. Finally, when it was only 5 minutes before the recording, Zachary's clothes were ready. As soon as I reached the doorknob, I was stopped by Zachary. He chuckled and said, "Ava, apply some concealer to your ears next time." With that, he opened the door and left first. I looked at myself in the mirror. The tips of my ears all turned red out of embarrassment. Zachary is so handsome. Why does he always wear big framed sunglasses to cover his face? I can hardly see his perfect face clearly at all when he does that. Isn't it obvious? Zachary is loyal to me. He will only allow me to appreciate his handsome face at our home. Hey, your hubby last month was still Timothy Chase. You remarried so quickly. Of course. Zachary is now my new husband. Two young girls chattered and giggled as they scrolled through photos on their phones. But a middle-aged woman beside them suddenly interrupted their dream of infatuation with handsome stars. Hey, you too. Why do you call other men your hubbies so casually? The two girls looked puzzled, and one studied the woman with disdain. Who are you? What's wrong with you? I'm saying that my new husband is Zachary J. So what? Zachary J is my son-in-law. The instant she finished speaking, the two girls burst into laughter. What a lunatic. This middle-aged woman was my mother, Sylvie Jones. Just as my mother was about to deliver a stern lecture to them, I arrived in a hurry and stopped her. "Mom, what are you doing?" My mother glared at me grumpily and handed me her stuff. "See? Loads of girls are obsessed with Zachary now. You should feel scared. You even forgot your husband's birthday. You'll finally regret it when your husband is taken away." My mother even poked my temples as she spoke. I carried 2 large bags of food and said, "It's not such a big deal to get a divorce." I regretted saying so immediately as my mom kept scolding me hence. Fortunately, I didn't tell her that my marriage with Zachary was fake. Otherwise, she would never let me off. When I got home, my father was already preparing the soup while Zachary was assisting him. Instantly, my mother switched from a serious mother to a kind mother-in-law. "Zach, you're so nice." Ava has hardly ever helped with housework since she was a child. I silently put down the ingredients and was about to enter the room, but I didn't expect my mother to start complaining to Zachary. "Zach, do you think I was wrong just now? You're married. It's not appropriate for those little girls to call you hubby." A hint of a smile flashed across Zachary's eyes, and then he pretended to be sad and sighed. "Mom, Ava." My mother suddenly became anxious. "What's wrong? She doesn't treat you well?" Zachary glanced at me and pursed his lips. No, but there were hidden grievances in his tone. "Zachary, don't be afraid. Tell me, and I'll uphold justice for you." My mother's scowl shocked me. I looked closer at Zachary and realized I was in trouble. "Ava, she doesn't like letting others know she's married. Even if people find out, she will only say that her husband has the same name as me. She thinks our relationship will cause trouble for our work. So she asked me to pretend not to know her when we were at the TV station." Zachary pursed his lips tightly as if he was suppressing his feelings. I couldn't explain but could only hurriedly deny. "I didn't." "Mom, I'm your daughter. I only have one son now." "Dad, Mom is acting crazy." After dinner, my parents sent us downstairs. I didn't know what Zachary had whispered to my mother, but I saw her sincerely comfort him by saying, "Zach, there's no hurry to have a baby." My mother glimpsed at me, who was at a loss, and said, "Ava is lazy and never exercises. Encourage her to get more exercise." Zachary put his arm around my shoulder and nodded with a victorious smile. "Mom, don't worry. I'll take good care of Ava." I had to admit that Zachary was exemplary at acting. I even believed we were a real couple for a few seconds. But as Zachary's car stopped at my new residence, I came to my senses and accepted the fact that everything was fake. Recently, I had been so busy with the studio's work that I had forgotten the time my period would come. Today, I had inadequate sleep because of my period pains. When I got up and looked in the mirror, I saw my terrible dark circles, almost turning me into a panda. I bought my iced Americano from a cafe near my house and rushed to the studio. Today was another day to record the show. I endured the pain in my lower abdomen when looking for suitable clothes for the contestants. Cold sweat broke out on my back while my head was dizzy with pain. I turned around and was about to drink some more coffee to refresh myself, only to find that my iced Americano on the table had disappeared. How come there was someone who would even steal another person's beverage? It's very kind of Mr. J to give me the beats of music he made, though I've heard the songs he produced before. I didn't expect that he would arrange music for me and come to discuss its details with me," a contestant said in a low voice, unable to hide his excitement. "That's right, he's not only handsome but also talented with a good personality. Initially, I thought he was just a nobody who came to gain popularity, but later I learned he produced many hit songs." Another contestant nodded in agreement. I looked back in the direction of the voice. I didn't know when Zachary had come to the dressing room. Now he was walking outside with a laptop in his hand and my half glass of iced Americano in his other hand. I reached into my pocket for my phone and was about to question him on WhatsApp, but I found a pack of painkillers. There was also a thumb-sized note in the pocket that said, "Remember to take the painkiller." Zachary's handwriting was the same as it was in high school, sharp and uninhibited. I folded the note and put it away with an unconscious smile. I could feel the warmth deep down. After another round of busy work, a voice suddenly came from outside the door. "Is Zachary's lady around? Your coffee is here." Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked toward the door. Their gazes left the delivery guy a little at a loss. He looked at his phone and said, "It's indeed Zachary's honey written here." "Who on earth is Zachary's honey? You've ordered a hot coffee." Everyone was waiting for the owner of the coffee to appear, including me. I couldn't help but think that whoever had ordered a takeout coffee named Zachary's honey to Zachary's dressing room was fearless of embarrassment. The delivery guy became a little impatient. He looked at his phone again and said, "Zachary's honey. The last 4 digits of your phone number is 3523. I've called you many times, but you didn't answer." I suddenly remembered that my phone number also ended in 3523. Could it be? I quickly took out my phone and found I had accidentally muted it. Sure enough, there were a bunch of missed calls. Needless to say, it must be Zachary playing tricks again. I pretended it had nothing to do with me and tried to keep a calm face as I slowly moved my legs, ready to escape. However, Bob suddenly asked, "Wasn't that your phone number?" I was dumbfounded and almost died of embarrassment on the spot. Everyone turned to look at me, and then the dressing room was filled with a sudden burst of laughter. I forced a smile and said, "My husband likes to kid around." "Ava, your husband is so sweet." "Ha ha ha." "Ava, is your husband jealous? Does he want to declare his exclusive love by this?" "Ava, you and your husband are so funny." Ha ha ha. While they were teasing me, I picked up the cup of hot coffee. The remaining warmth in my heart was replaced by the impulse to splash the hot coffee on Zachary's face.